Hello, everyone. My name is Caden, and I am speaking today on behalf of RAN, or the Rainforest Action Network. As you know, we have partnered with you in order to conserve some islands in your country, specifically a 5 island chain. You've allocated us 475 million rupee for land purchase. And the reason we want to conserve these 5 island chains is because of the snails that are on this island. Some native species, some exotic, and some invasive. But before I talk too much about that, I wanted to really talk about land snails and why they're important for the ecology there. So, Stylometaphora is the order that we're talking about. That encompasses all air breathing land snails. And they have a couple of functions that make them unique and important to the local ecology. First of all, they're hermaphroditic. They are predatory and herbivorous. They can eat plants or they can eat each other. And some of them are also necrophagous, which we'll get to in a little bit. But because of their herbivory, they are considered agricultural pests. Uh, like I said, the necrophagy allows them to be minor decomposers, so they can perform some ecosystem functions that not a lot of animals can. Of course, their role is not as big as fungi and other guilds. They also are considered intermediate hosts for some mammalian species. Thankfully, they're not bovine or porcine intermediary hosts. It's mainly cervine animals, which means that we shouldn't be too concerned with them being a problem for ranching and livestock. And finally, they are calcium cyclers. They can consume other snail shells or bones, any sort of calcium carbonate matrix, and absorb it into them. So I'm going to talk about the data and methods, kind of the analysis that we did over the information and data that you provided us. And as you know, you've given us some BioBlitz data, just basic populations for each species on different islands. And so what we did is we thought, well, our first step is going to be to find diversity indices rather, for all of these islands. And so we did that. And this is an example. This is Ibu. This is the largest island. And you can see how we took that data and found our richness, our evenness, and the abundance of species on that island. And we further refined that into several diversity indices, and just to get a better idea of how diverse are these islands really. Through this data, we realized that a lot of these numbers aren't comparable. So in order to normalize them, we gave them ranks, right? The most performing and the least performing in each category. And then we averaged that to make it a little bit more human readable. And as you can tell already, we have 2 islands that are standing out as being deficient, and that is Putri and Bin. We also decided to calculate the rank per area, but that wasn't very useful, so we decided to go a different direction. What's another index that we can use to get a better idea of diversity? And we would refer to this as endemism, the percent endemism, but in this case, I'm going to be talking about it as uniqueness. How unique are the species that are on each island? Do they only appear in one place? Do they appear in 2? And we distribute that amongst the islands to get an idea. We average that, and then we also measured that against the percent species saved. And again, we see deficiency in both Putri and Bin. They rank the lowest in these categories. And finally, we just did some basic cost analysis. If we were to buy this amount of islands, how much land would be saved, and how much of our budget would be used. But before I get into exactly what a proposal is, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the population dynamics of the snails on the island. First thing, snails have really low dispersal. They can't travel far. And to give an example of that, we're going to look at Ibu, the largest island. It has about 11-kilometer diameter. And in 1 year, a snail can travel that far. That's really hard to see, so we're going to blow it up a little bit. In a year, a snail can travel about 78 meters. In 3 years, about 230. That's not a long distance. To give a comparison for us, that's about a kilometer measured on the screen. We could travel that in about 20 minutes through dense forest, and a snail would take about 13 years to do the same thing. Why is that important? Because they already have low dispersal, combined with the fact that they cannot swim. They will drown in water, and if they're already moving that slow, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to disperse onto a new island. But obviously, they have dispersed onto all of these islands somehow, and we want to look at that. how does this dispersal affect the endemicity or the percent uniqueness for each of these islands? And as we can see, we have two standouts. Anakilong, the smallest island and the furthest away, and also Ibu, the largest island. And we notice that the smallest and largest island have the highest values, and the middle range islands have middle amount. Now we can explain the Anakilong having such a high percentage endemicity because it is isolated, which means that there's going to be low dispersal. But that also begs the question, why does Ibu, the largest island, have a higher endemicity than all the others? And we primarily attribute that to trophic level. Larger islands kind of give more resources and allow for higher trophic levels, and we know that a lot of snails are predatory, and a lot of the snails on Ibu are predatory. But we also want to talk about abundance, and notice the same pattern here. The largest and smallest island have the most extreme values. And this is again explained by the same metric, area. By simply having more area, you're allowing more resources to provide for your animals. So what is our proposal? What do we suggest you do? Well, we think you should buy 3 islands, Ibu, Aya, and Anakilong. These 3 islands, with just the 3 islands being purchased, we're going to save about 76% of the land and 94% of the species, which is really good. And we're also going to have 55 million rupee left over. But our proposal comes with an issue, and that is that one native species will not be saved, Rotatoria. So what do we do about that? What are we going to do about Rotatoria if they won't be saved? And we think the solution is going to be managed relocation, displacing them from their original islands and helping them disperse, which, as we know, snails have a really hard time doing. So we're hoping that we can partner with you and have a little project with the leftover funds that were given by the land purchase, and we want to try and relocate Rotatoria to another island. Now, the biggest issue with this is that Rotatoria is a species that doesn't exist on these other islands, so introducing them could be detrimental for the other species there. And so we took that seriously. We still want to save them, but we have to think about what effect are they going to have. Frankly, we don't have a lot of information on these islands. We only have populations and what has been documented in scientific literature. So what could we find? Well, we found that Rotatoria is non-predatory, which is important, and it's necrophagous, which means they're not going to directly compete with any other snails, but also indirectly, they are necrophagous. They have a niche that isn't really taken up by a lot of the other snails that we see here, which is why the best location we think is going to be Aya. And as we can see, Anakilong looks great. It's mostly native, and our species is native, which means that they have co-evolved for some time, which means they really shouldn't take over a lot of the same resources. However, Anakilong is a very small island. There aren't a lot of resources, and it might not be enough to support them. We don't want to risk anything happening to that island because it's a really important one in terms of biodiversity, endemic species. So we thought, well, where else can we go? Aya has a very similar amount of percent native species as both Putri and Bin. Now, that isn't everything. And we did look and we thought, okay, what species is Rotatoria not interacting with now that they could interact with on Aya? So we thought Aya is going to be our best bet. Worst case scenario, the snail Rotatoria is choked out by the species that are already established there. And second worst scenario, Rotatoria chokes out another species that's on that island. Now, why is that the second worst scenario? Because we have redundancy. All of the species that are on Aya are not unique there, and they can be found on Ibu or Anakilong, which means we're safe in that sense. But that's all. We really hope that you've enjoyed our presentation. Here's some of the references we use, and we look forward to partnering with you in this managed relocation effort. Thank you.